prosecutors were making their case on Friday before the judge, they asked for no bail because he's also a suspect in a fourth murder of a fourth young woman. And then, of course, the other thing was some of the evidence that they had that he allegedly used one of the victim's phones after she was killed to taunt her relatives, to taunt her younger sister, who was 16 years old at the time, and the family members. So that's something that people are very shocked by.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. There you have it. The Long Island serial killer suspect Rex Heuermann allegedly taunted Melissa Barthelomew's family in phone calls after her death. That's according to what you've just heard on Fox News. And so in this episode, I want to talk about extreme depravity. Where does it come from? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. Just a reminder that I'm a true crime author. I've authored dozens of books on true crime. If you're interested in this case, I'll be doing a lot of deep dives where we'll go through lots of different areas in terms of this case, the psychology, the timeline, the victimology, the entire fabric of this case. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. So I want to talk about the source of that extreme depravity. It's a psychological question, but at the same time, I want to juxtapose certain facets of this guy's psychology. So we've just heard about the taunting, and there's something sadistic about something like that. Besides that, the Mercury News recently reported that Heuermann filed 4 lawsuits in New York courts between 2014 and 2022, basically 4 lawsuits in the past 10 years against drivers who he said had hit him with their cars. So you kind of get a sense of someone who can be quite prickly, who doesn't really brook no truck with, excuse the pun, with people who kind of get in his way. But then you also get this other side to him. You have a co-worker describing him as a gem to deal with, very knowledgeable, describing him with fondness as a big goofy guy and a bit of a geek, a guy who worked long hours and was available day and night whenever you needed him, but yet he was also a devoted father and husband. And then there's this other description of him as an average guy, quiet, a family man, and we got that from Billy Baldwin, to name one. A neighbor describes him as someone you would cross the street to avoid. He described him as someone you didn't want to get close to. And so what do we see? Within just 48 hours of his arrest, we're already seeing 2 completely different versions of the same person. On the one hand, quiet, nerdy, harmless, devoted, even loyal. On the other, apparently deranged, depraved, cruel, sadistic. How did this happen? Why did this happen? I think one has to start with the fact that serial killers wear masks, which is why they are able to coexist with regular society for years, and in this one's case for over a decade. And so we are well aware of the normal mask, the mask of normality, the average Joe. But then there's another mask. But I want to make it clear that this aspect of having a public face and a private face is something that they share with all of us. To some extent, regular folks wear masks as well. This isn't unnatural or wrong or anything to be ashamed of. Human psychology involves a public face and a private face. Some things family and society teach and show us are meant to be private, but sometimes that private space can be a dark place, and family and society can start to feel like a cage. It's very early to be making the statement I'm going to make because everyone seems to be in a race to control or capture the narrative. And one of the races is, let's put a label on this guy. Let's decide what kind of disorder he has and what kind of whatever psychology he has, when we should be curious and try to gather more information as much as we can before we make that assessment. Nevertheless, what I'm going to say what's already very apparent to society and to the likes of Billy Baldwin with his 220,000 Twitter followers. Heuermann was quiet and average. I don't think that is a strange thing to say about him. I don't think it's reaching to make that comment about him. But I think the insight regarding that particular statement is to ask the question, do you think he liked being average? You might like being average. You might see nothing wrong with someone else who's average. Someone actually made the comment saying, a lot of people get bullied at school, and I'm one of them, by the way, and you don't become a serial killer. This isn't about your experience of bullying. This isn't about your experience perhaps as an introvert. This is about this person's experience. It's not about you. It's about him. And so the question isn't what you think about being average. What did he think about it? And to me, I've got to say, does anyone really like being average? I mean, all these superhero movies, are they celebrating average people with average abilities? And so what you have is someone who's so quiet and nondescript. We know more about his taxes than we do his social media. And look at that word nondescript. It means lacking anything distinctive. There's nothing interesting about him, right? He's featureless. He's unremarkable. Now, you might say, I don't mind being ordinary, but this guy was so ordinary that he didn't even seem to have social media. Is that average, or is that strange and unusual? If we go back to his high school class of 1981 in Massapequa, who would you rather be? Billy Baldwin or Rex Hauerman? Would you rather be good-looking, athletic, part of the in-crowd, or Rex Hauerman? The interesting thing with Hauerman is how hard he wants to belong. He spends 30 years working with a property manager in Brooklyn. He still lives in the house where he grew up in. He marries young at 26. He has 2 children. One of them, his daughter, is Victoria. She works at Macy's as a sales associate in New York while she's studying at the New York Institute of Technology. She graduates with a BFA in Fine Arts in 2019. He also has a son, apparently a nice kid with special needs. He puts himself squarely in the role society demands. Husband, father, breadwinner.
What more than that?
Well, exactly. Don't let his quiet averageness fool you, because he has agency. He starts his own firm. He divorces his first wife, Elizabeth Ryan, then he marries again, this time a woman with an Icelandic heritage, and he stays married to her. And she was actually supporting him by his side in court on Friday. So however objectionable you find this person, somebody else made a life with him, wanted to be with him, wants to be by his side, present tense. And so what we want to know is, when he divorced his first wife, when was that? And why? How does that relate to the fabric, if at all? Did the pornography start after that or before? Did she realize, did his first wife realize in some way who he was becoming? Or did he realize in some way who he wanted to be and who he wasn't and who he'd lost? Because sometimes that private space, even the ones of our own making, can be a dark place. And family and society, even the family and society one chooses to have around you, can feel like a box. Did his first wife experience the schism, not so much the fact of 2 faces, but just how far apart they were until they were a bridge too far? Did he satiate that anger that had been building up in one of those lives, and which is why we ended up with 2 lives? One digital, not social but antisocial, the other bricks and mortar. In the one life he looks up and builds, in the other he looks down and hooks up with people, and he breaks and mutilates, he taunts and mocks. It's all about an eye for an eye. An eye for an eye, dealing with what? Well, the real question is dealing with when. In any event, here's the answer. The source of sadism is childhood trauma. This could be at school or at home or both. You might say, wow, I don't carry any childhood trauma with me. Good for you. Many people do. Some people deal with it. Some people are unable to. For some people, that trauma overwhelms them. Part of that trauma may be the simple exclusion from the process of sexual awakening. Not missing one party, but missing all of them. Not missing out on one date or one prom, but missing out on that whole swathe of experience. You know, all the good, fun high school stuff that high school's famous for, proms, first kisses, and a series of infatuations that prove just how soaring your social status is. And what's more, it's going to be one day. What a bright future you have ahead of you. What about the losers? For them, it's confirmation of the opposite, that there's nothing to look forward to, that you are doomed to be a nobody, that because of one's appearance or personality or lack of a particular brand of wit at a particular juncture, one is deemed permanently defective. What does that feel like? What is the price of such an evaluation by one's peers? How painful can an assessment like that feel? You might say, I was rejected, it didn't really bother me. This isn't about how you felt, it's how somebody else felt. It's almost like being told as a young person, someone who hasn't committed any crime, that they are nevertheless due a particular life sentence that they've got to carry out, that they've got to endure for the crime of living. And so again, what is the price of such an evaluation? Well, one answer to that is perhaps 11 sets of human remains found along Long Island's GILGO beach since 2010. Maybe it's not 11 sets, maybe it's 4 sets. The source of sadism, as I said, is childhood trauma. Some of it, no doubt, is inflicted by the outside world. But much of it, no doubt, has to do with how one stands up and dusts oneself off. How does one respond? How does one recover? How does one rebuild? Can you turn a fall into a dive? Unfortunately, in the adolescent phase, one isn't so much a master of one's emotions, but caught inside that rolling tsunami. You're not in control. You haven't learned or established control. Inside the washer, perspective can be fleeting. Things can be terrifying. The daily experience can feel like an existential crisis with no end. And that is what childhood trauma can feel like. It can leave lasting scars. A child like Jeffrey Dahmer might experience some sort of harm coming from a parent, even if it's a kind of self-harm. This trauma is then compounded, or can be compounded, by a careless, heartless society that makes fun of the shy, awkward boy with emotional problems. And so these emotional problems deepen, particularly at that critical adolescent age when a person needs to reach out, expand, experience themselves and experience others. Instead, he becomes crushed in, and while others are spreading their wings, what's he doing? He's walking on eggshells. He's gathering the broken eggshells into a makeshift shield to protect himself. And now what I want to do is show you a photo from Holman's high school. Which kid in this photo is Holman? Do you think there's only one candidate? Does he stand out like a sore thumb? Or doesn't he stand out? If it's hard to make out that the awkward kid in question in a sea of awkward kids is the one in the second row far left, well, that's because emotional reality is invisible. My emotional reality is invisible to you. Yours might be invisible to me. Of course, you can also read someone's affect and try and be sensitive to someone's outward behavior. And so even if it is invisible, it's nevertheless very, very real. It's experienced. In some ways, one can run from it or try to recast one's reality. But in other ways, reality, including emotional reality, is what it is. One's caught, certainly as a teenager sometimes, in that rolling wave. And you just got to roll with it if you can.
Dread it, run from it, destiny arrives all the same. And now it's here.
All people must go through a period of renewal, of raw experience with the moist black cake of the world, the dirt, the sex, the sweat of real life. Delay only makes that impending catharsis more loaded, more fraught, more difficult, more dangerous. Postponing life opens the door to dysfunction, anality, and eventually depravity. Somewhere in Rex Hauermann's past, they mocked what he made, and so this is his revenge, isn't it? settling of scores, sadism. But if he had to settle a score, someone opened the scoring. I wonder who that was. And so, here we are in the present, and he's in court, and Asa, his wife, is standing beside him in the courtroom. He pleads not guilty to murder charges. Asa looks distraught, and she says, please leave me alone. I won't be saying anything. I wonder, will any other family members come forward? Are they shocked to the core? Do they feel betrayed? And how about his own children? Did they recognize red flags in their own father? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.